Did you know that nature's ecosystem is potentially the answer to your business's growth? Lee Mulberry is here from Northern Star Consulting to talk about organizational rewilding. This is a strategic, behavior driven approach that adapts to your team size. It prepares your team for growth at every single stage with predictive things that are going to happen. And by doing so, it accelerates your growth at every single stage, whether you're in it for the long haul or potentially looking for a business exit and sale. So, Lee, can you explain the concept of organizational rewilding?
Sure. The way that it got started was a study of what was done in Yellowstone when they had a problem with the ecosystem. And the problem was that the elk were coming down out of their natural habitat in the mountains and were eating the grass and the shrubs in areas that they typically hadn't. And it drove off animals like beavers and a lot of the birds. And so the natural systems that protected the wetlands were gone. And so the wetlands started to dry up, and it was really impacting the whole ecosystem of Yellowstone. And so the decision was made that they had to reintroduce the gray wolves because there were too many elk. Originally, they thought, okay, the problem is there's too many elk, so we just need to thin the herds. So that was a surface problem and a surface solution. They thinned the herds. It didn't change the behavior of the elk. So when they reintroduced the wolves, it changed the behavior. It not only thinned the herds further, but it pushed them back up into the mountains, which allowed the wetlands and stuff to regenerate, called a trophic cascade. Stuff just started to fall into place. And over the intervening years, it really brought the park back. So when the owner of ReWild bought the intellectual capital from the stages of growth and the navigating the growth curve, he decided that there were a lot of parallels with what happened in Yellowstone and what tends to happen in business. And he looks at business as human ecosystems. And ecosystems, by its very nature, want to stay in balance. And when they get out of balance, they need to be corrected. Well, typically in nature, if the cause of the imbalance is natural, they can be self-healing. If the problem is human caused, then they tend not to be self-healing. So if you take that by extension and take that to a human ecosystem in business, the imbalances are almost all human caused. And so it's very difficult, if not impossible, for him to self-heal. And so what needs to happen is an analysis needs to take place which determines what part of the ecosystems are out of balance. And that's part of what we can do with ReWild, is to assess that and say, here are the things that are just plain missing. We need to reinfuse those. And so because there was so much synergy between what happened in Yellowstone and what we do in business, hence the name organizational rewilding.
That's great. And I noticed, like, in the stages of growth, so this is a growth focused system. And then instead of focusing on revenue, the system focuses on the size of the organization. Can you talk about the different stages and why those matter and why it's organized that way?
Sure. The fundamental reason that it's organized by number of people is that is the closest link to complexity. So you can have a two-person firm and do $20 million a year, say if you're in legal or in the financial world or something like that. Well, there's not a lot of complexity with two people. But for other companies to do $20 million, it could mean 20 people or 100 or 150, depending on how labor intensive the product is. If you're in the service business, then it could be quite a few people. Well, when you get that number of people into an organization, then the complexity rises significantly. And all those issues of managing people and dealing with people come into play. And so that's why we determined that the real segmentation for growth is how many people are in the organization to be able to prosecute the business. And the way that the leadership needs to behave and the things that they need to deal with tend to become very specific for each stage. So there is overlap, but it's really a building block. If you do what you're supposed to do during stage one, it makes the transition to stage two much easier. You're preparing for it. Stage one and two are owner-centric stages where the owner is really running the show. When you start to get above 20 people, into stage 3, now you become enterprise centric. And if in stage 2 you haven't started to develop a management team, or at least some people that look like they could be good managers, then when you get to stage 3, the span of control for the owner is way too broad.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to lose control. And it's hard to be able to deal with the people on a personal basis. And they need that personal touch. And that's why you have layers of management. And then the other thing that tends to happen in stage 3 is we ask them to build silos of excellence. Now, if you're from corporate America, you've always heard the term silos, and it always comes across negative. We got to get rid of the silos. Well, what we're espousing in stage 3 is that you actually build those silos of excellence. You get people that know what they're doing in a certain area and grow that capability, make sure the processes and systems are in place so that when you get to stage 4, you can start putting your leadership team together, and as your leadership team goes across the top, now you start to take down those silo walls, but you still have the silo of excellence. So those are the kind of things that we think about as we move from stage to stage, and why the number of people start to become a huge determinant.
Yeah. And so when you think about the missing elements, like the wolves with the elk, like taking them out, had an overpopulation of elk, and then bringing them back in, how do you equate bringing the wolves back in, or the missing elements? How do you identify those for companies, and then how, based on different stages or their problems, or just talk about a little how you dive into those elements?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's at the core of what we do. We have the business the ReWild business assessment. And in that, we ask the owner questions, and based on what they respond to us, we put it through our algorithm, and then look at it with the knowledge that we have based upon thousands of companies that we have worked with and studied over the years. And we can tell them, and there are 11 key systemic elements, and we can tell them which ones they're having trouble with. It may be their business model, the way that they approach it. Maybe their brand and core values aren't there. And the brand and core values are the essence of culture. How are decisions being made? And are decisions at the lowest level being made in concert with those core values? It may be organizational structure. We have a methodology where we use what we call functional org charts, where you don't put any names on it, you put titles. And you say, okay, I want to be this size in 1 year or 2 years. What does my organization need to look like to prosecute that? And then you lay that out, and then you lay your organization as it is today. And one of the things that really helps with is it delineates what needs to be done by each individual position. And what you find is, as companies grow, there are individuals within the company that pick up hats, jobs that they wear just because either someone needed to do it or they have a certain skill set. Well, Nancy's like that. She's picked up a bunch of different jobs. She's critically important, but she decides to leave or retires or whatever. A lot of owners start to think, I need to replace Nancy. No, you don't. You need to go back to the position role sheets, hire somebody for that, and then make sure those other hats go where they're supposed to go. And so we have a way of identifying where are those weaknesses and what needs to be done. And then we come back and say, okay, here's where they're out. And if you look at the stages of growth matrix, which we like to refer to as a business GPS, it tells you what you're facing now, what you're going to face. And if you don't deal with those, it's not going to go away. They're going to come back to bite you. And we have what we call the non-negotiable rules of business, and in each stage they're there. And if you don't take care of them, I have dealt with companies that are in stage 6 or 7, so that means they have hundreds of folks, and they're still dealing with issues they should have fixed in stage 3 and 4. Well, that becomes very apparent because it either hits the profitability or the top line, either one of those. But oftentimes what I find is that the top line's pretty good. They've got a business development process that works, but as they grow, it's not falling to the bottom line. And that's because there's inefficiency. There's something in there that's stopping that from happening. And it could be as simple as some of the decision making that's going on. It could be that you didn't get your processes in place when you needed to. Your leadership team is weak. Those are all key systemic elements. As a business owner, you have a list of to-dos. So say you've got 20 things on your list. If you deal with those one at a time, you're going to tend to get into the whack-a-mole where you
Yeah.
fix this and then something else pops up and you fix that. If you look at it from a key systemic element basis, you could fix anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 of those issues in one fell swoop.
I'm guessing you have some attention here because I feel like in my own journey, this feels really relevant. So, do you have an example of somebody you've worked with where they were in stage 5, 6, 7, or further down the way, still dealing with things they should have solved? And to your point, avoiding that whole whack-a-mole sort of
Yes.
approach. Can you talk us through some of that?
Yeah, I worked with a large landscaping company, 450 employees.
Mhm.
And one of the issues when you're in a service business like that, you have a lot of people that are customer facing.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you want to do as a business owner or leader is to have control of what your people are saying to your customers. And this company didn't have that. And there were a couple of things. One was that he didn't have a good leadership team. 450 employees. The span of control at the top level was just enormous, and that caused problems of communication all the way through. Even affected things like onboarding new people, and one of the symptoms was heavy churn, a lot of turnover. Okay, well, people leave managers; they don't leave businesses. And so, if you're not managing them correctly, if you're not giving them the care and feeding that they need, another one was, he told me at lunch one day, he said, we're working on the documentation that we give to the customer about what we do. So in other words, they did commercial landscaping. They needed to take a picture of what was there before they started and what finished so they could prove what they were doing. It turns out that the owner of their company and this fellow who was the president were doing that work. And I'm sitting there saying, my gosh, this is something that should be done at the highest, at the director level, probably at the supervisor level. And these people are spending cycles doing that because they didn't have a good leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just, their business model was off. They didn't have a good leadership team. They didn't have control of the processes. And if they had followed the rules as they grew through stages 3, 4, 5, and 6, by the time they're in stage 7, they would have had those things dealt with.
In your experience, how long does it take for a company that has missed some of those fundamental elements to course correct, if you will? I mean, I'm sure it's sort of dependent, but what's your experience been?
It is definitely situational, but we have seen results in as little as 3 months.
Okay.
Depending on what the issue is. But once you start going down the right path and correcting things, that profit cascade can start pretty quickly, mainly because you get your people's attention that you're doing something that they've known about that was a problem for a long time. You just didn't recognize it. It's like, I've been telling you, but you didn't listen.
Right.
And so finally somebody said it in a way that they listened. And so the people start to get behind it. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a distribution company, a small one, that they distributed a lot of small electronic gear. Now, he wanted to increase the amount of packages going out from 1,800 a week to 2,500 a week. And the problem was that the people were not capable of doing that. And they had a negative attitude towards growth because they were already working flat out. And that while they appreciated what the owner wanted to do, and they really liked him as an owner, there wasn't a friction there, but there was a disconnect between the feeling that, yes, we can make that happen, and the reality. And so one of the things that we looked at is their systems inside the warehouse were broken. They were taking stuff out of incoming inspection without putting it into the computer, so their inventory was off. And it was all because the main driving goal of the company was 1,800 packages a week. And this goes back to where you have to have your core values be, we're going to follow the process, even if it means that we slow something down, but we're going to have great quality. That's part of your promise to your customers. So there were some things that were broken. As soon as we went back and said to the employees, okay, we want you to grow to 2,500 a week, and here's what we are going to do to make that happen for you so that you don't have to work harder, you're going to be able to work smarter. That had an impact within 60 days because they were ready to go, but they didn't have the ability to make it happen. And so once they got that, they were excited. They were ready to go. And so that then he started to see an uptick in the number of packages and saw no downturn in quality.
That's great. That's a great story. And I'm curious, I know you have mentioned assessments a few times. Is the assessment what's helping the leader understand the problem? So they're like, I need to grow, I need to grow, I need to grow, which is very common for entrepreneurs and leaders of those organizations. Instead of just flogging the employees to work harder, really digging into why. Is the assessment helping him or her figure out the what's in the way?
Absolutely. The entrepreneurs, their confidence, their self-assurance, their knowledge in certain areas are what got them where they are.
Mm-hmm.
But it also creates blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
And blind spots, by definition, are hidden. And so part of what I guess the real value of the Rewild Business Assessment is it lays those open for them, and it says, here are the things that you're not doing as well as you could. And one of the things that's important to us is that we work with an owner that has that confidence in himself or herself, but also has the humility to know that they can't do everything right.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're willing to say, okay, I accept that. I didn't do that as well as I could. Let's fix that.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the process can start. But if we get someone that is just too sensitive to admit that they might not have done something as well as they could, then it's difficult for them to recognize what we're trying to say that they should do.
Yeah. There's a lot of business assessments out there and a lot of ways to go about trying to diagnose the root cause of a problem. What do you like about the rewilding process, or what drew you to it that makes it better, different, deeper, more effective for you and when you're working with your clients?
For me, it was a fundamental shift, because when I've had my consulting business since 2005, and
Mm-hmm.
when I would come in and work with a company, it could take me weeks to get to the truth of the situation. And people lie. I don't mean that in a harsh way. It's just they lie to protect themselves. They lie to not admit that they aren't as good as they thought, or that they wanted people to believe, or whatever. And so it takes time to get behind that. The Rewild Business Assessment is a non-accusatory way for them to see their business in a whole different light. Then you add to that the whole stages of growth methodology, which is, as I said earlier, it's a business GPS. And it's based and it's so accurate. And I have absolute faith. After 5 years of this, I have absolute faith in it because I have seen it work.
Mm.
And I've gotten the response back from, I've done probably 50 or 60 assessments. I would say 45 of them said, I can't believe how much you know about my business. I think you might know more than I do,
Mm.
because we have a way of looking at it. It's so accurate. And then as you go through the stages, it's telling you what's happening to you now. So it's diagnostic. And then it says, okay, here's what we need to do to make it right. So it's prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you look forward into stages, it becomes predictive. It says, when you grow to this size, these are things that are going to happen to you. Now, one of the caveats is a huge percentage of American business is small business, and a huge percentage of those are in stage one, and they never get out of stage one. They never grow above 10 people. Well, the beauty of the stages of growth is, as they become mature in that stage one, they still start facing the issues of companies that are in stages 2, 3, and 4. And so if they look ahead and start doing those things to get their house in order, then even though the number of people don't expand, their profitability and oftentimes their revenue can extend. I had a customer that was in the import-export business, and he had 9 people. And he said, I don't want any more people than this. I don't want a hassle of a lot of things, but I want to grow both my top line and my bottom line. And so one of the things that we worked on was the efficiency and effectiveness of the people. How do you give them tools and the confidence that they can do more without working that much harder?
I love the predictive element of that. You know what's coming as you grow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, you can read a lot of books and you can listen to a lot of people on TV tell you about the future. But if someone can sit there and say, based upon our experience and what you're in, this is what's going to happen to you as you grow,
Right.
And they say, man, that's what happened to me. I was stage 2 and I got a big order. I went to stage 3 and I was almost ready to go into stage 4. And as we finished working on that big order, I found I didn't make any money on it. And I had to lay off. I was back to stage 2 again. And we told them that. And
Hmm.
that's what can happen, and showed them why and how. And so
Yeah.
if you don't do the things, the non-negotiable rules, then that's how it yo-yos. And it's really amazing the number of times that happens in business.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like you think, because it sounds like you've worked with companies across all kinds of industries. And like, what I'm hearing from you is like, this is the guts of how businesses operate in growth. So despite customers, despite market conditions, economies, whatnot, if you're growing, the scaffolding, if you will, of your business is going to grow like this. And it's a pretty predictable process. And if you pay attention, you can avoid some pain. Is that true?
Very much so. And
Yeah.
again, it goes back to our focus is on number of people and on the people and the leadership. And those, I don't know what percentage, but 70, 75, 80% of leadership problems are common irrespective of industry.
I want to go back to the owners that you're talking about, the combination of confidence and humility. And what was the pain that caused them to go find you? What was finally the breaking point to say, I need some help here. I'm not figuring this out on my own.
And to make it real simple is that feeling of being stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm stuck. I've got the top line going. I've got a good business revenue methodology, but I can't get it to drop to the bottom line, or I just can't seem to have a steady business development program. I don't have that, or high turnover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and high
Mm-hmm.
turnover is almost always a sign of bad leadership. Again, go back to the comment: people leave
Mm-hmm.
people. They don't leave businesses. But a hostile work environment. Um, the definition of that has actually changed, and not paying attention to me as an employee can be defined as hostile work environment.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if in fact that's a driver to people leaving, then it is.
I think it's the example you're using before, where you had a business owner who wanted to grow and employees who wanted to grow with him, but didn't have the structure or the tools to do so. And that can very easily tip from, we want to help you, to, you're on some cloud, not in reality here. And then that can start to feel like, we want to support you, but you keep pushing me to do things that actually aren't possible. It can start to feel hostile. And so by addressing those issues, to your point of addressing multiple issues at once, you're addressing the process, the systems, but also engagement, employee support, feeling cared for, and all that good stuff too.
Right. And he had the beginnings of an issue with turnover. And that was
Yeah.
one of the things that we talked about. And that was when we have a little thing that we call the builder protector ratio, where we look at how many people in the company have a feeling of confidence that we should grow, and how many people are saying, no, we really shouldn't grow.
Interesting.
And when we did that exercise, he put all of his people on the builder side. He said, no, they're right with me. I've talked to them. They're there. And based upon my experience and what I have seen, I disagreed with him. I said, I'm sorry, Mike. I think they're mostly over here. He said, why would you say that? And then I explained it to him. And when
Mm-hmm.
we dug into it, that was right. But the thing about the builder protector ratio is, if people are on that side, it doesn't mean that that's a permanent situation. That is a snapshot in time based upon the conditions that they're working in. So
Yeah.
you take that and fix those issues. Now all of a sudden they were builders, and they said, okay, yeah, we'll, under these conditions, we're willing to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. With this kind of support and you understanding what we're doing here.
And,
I
and
love
that
that.
goes that goes back to the question that you had about how soon can you see things. If you get the people behind you and they say, yes, you've finally seen the light, let's go, those changes can happen pretty rapidly. Now
Yeah.
changing an organizational structure or putting some of the fundamental things in place takes a little longer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like having an athletic team where you don't have any superstars. You just got a lot of really good players. And if you can do the things to get them jazzed up and get them really ready to go, they can beat teams with superstars.
Yeah.
You see
Yeah.
You see it every day. And I love
Right.
that analogy because my definition of excellence for a worker is above average all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like superstars because they go up and down. The care and feeding is hard. They're not good teammates. And in most businesses, the team working together is the secret sauce. And again, that goes back to why Rewild focuses so heavily on the people, not just the structure and that kind of thing, because the people are what get it done.
It's interesting. I work with a lot of companies, business owners who are thinking about exiting their business and selling it. And one of the key things is having your team in place, your management team, but also your employees on board. And it seems like this is a perfect system to assess and then have some practical and potentially fairly quick ways to right the ship and prepare for exits. Have you worked with companies that exit or are in a fast trajectory of growth for shorter term horizon?
Yeah, I've worked with both types. One of my reference partners is the Exit Planning Institute folks,
Yeah.
and they are people that handle exit planning where the owner says, "I want to sell,"
Yeah.
and hopefully he's saying, "I want to sell in 2 to 3 or 5 years," so that we
Exactly. Yeah.
find
Not tomorrow, right? Yeah.
right. Uh, and then those folks in their world, I'm a business accelerator. That's their
Yeah.
term. Okay. And so what they're trying to do is they're saying, if you work with this person, we can maximize your exit
Yeah.
and the value that you'll get by growing the business. And people that are buying businesses, they're looking at a whole bunch of different factors. And part of what they're looking at is how owner centric is this business? If that owner sells and then goes away, what's going to happen? Is it a solid enough business model that it can grow and expand, not irrespective of who I put at the top, but it's pretty much can go.
Yeah.
So that's part of why we work on that strategy at the top and that leadership team.
One thing that we talked about beforehand, and I wanted to make sure was clear to business owners. A lot of them are running on EOS, and that this is a complementary sort of process, and it fits in and does not compete too much, at least with EOS. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how they can work together?
Now, EOS is a really, really good system. And
Yeah.
in fact, some of my good friends are EOS implementers, and I've gotten referrals from them, and I've given them referrals because basically what we work more at the strategic leadership level, and they are a get it done. Now, they have
Mhm.
probably a 10 or 15% overlap where they have things that they do with the leadership team, but it's more in the area of here are things we want you as a leadership team to accept and agree to do. And we're in, let's develop that leadership team. Let's make it happen. Let's identify the people and grow them and get them to be a leadership team. So we work very well with EOS folks.
That's great. So you can assess, like, here's the problems, and then the EOS team can get it done. Would that be a fair
Yeah,
assessment?
they would definitely be impacted in getting it done. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's great.
One of my
Um,
biggest customers is implementing EOS right now.
yeah. Okay. And how are they, just talk a little, just briefly, like, how are they taking what you've done with them and how is that integrating then into EOS?
I guess the way I would answer that is if you've got the right business model and you've got the right organizational structure and you have your culture and your core values and your brand values identified, then EOS comes in and says, to prosecute it, let's do these things because this behavior will get you the result at the bottom. So that's
Mhm.
how they kind of blend in nicely.
You just mentioned behavior, and in the very beginning, you talked about behavior change, and we just come full circle here with the elk and changing their behavior. So just culling the herd, they still stayed in the grasslands and ate on the grass, and so by reintroducing the wolves back in, it changed the behavior. So can you just say just a little bit of, like, even around your management team or leadership team, what kind of behaviors do you see them adopt and change to make this happen?
Probably the biggest one is when you can get the leadership team to start thinking about, okay, here's my role. I'm right in the middle. What can happen to this part of the business so that when they feed me my piece, I can be more effective? So how can I tell them that? And then if I look downstream, what can I do with my piece to make them more effective? When you start getting that kind of behavior, they're thinking about the business on a whole. And part of what happens as a race, we're very competitive. and we want to win. And a lot of managers use that competition in their business, and they pit these managers against each other to try to get their juices going and get them working harder. And there's nothing wrong with that philosophy as long as it's kept in check. But when you get a manager or leader of your organization thinking only about themselves, that's when your productivity can go down, because decisions are being made that are self-serving, but maybe don't help upstream or downstream. And so that's one of the primary behavior changes that significantly impact a company, is getting them to understand that it is a team, and if the team wins, you win. And part of that's changing some of the thought process of the owner, that it's really great to heap praise on somebody, but if you do it to the point where it creates animosity or jealousy, then you've got something you really have to deal with. And that jealousy is what creates silos of thought.
What I love about the upstream and the downstream is that's also increasing their critical thinking, and also getting out of being in the business and looking, working on the business, or looking at it from the balcony, if you will, looking down and being like, here's my part. If I mess my part up, that impacts these people. And I also need to be ready for this coming from the upstream people too.
A comment on that. When you're talking about working on the business versus in it, we tend to, as humans, equate activity with results. And usually you can, but it just depends on if you're working on the right stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you can have employees that are really, really busy and they're just working hard. But if they're working on the wrong things, or if they're doing it in a slightly wrong way, then that negatively impacts the company. You're not going to recognize that if you're down there with them working in the weeds all the time. And if you don't have that time to step back and look at the business strategically and look at what's happening in the competitive landscape, and are they getting better and you're not, or are you keeping up? Are you ahead of them? What are the things that could take your business away? Are there technological advances that coming that you don't know about now? But an owner needs to live on the edge of scared all the time.
Yes.
It's unfortunate, but it's just a reality. And part of what they want to do is to make sure that their people have some dissatisfaction with the status quo, because that's what motivates people to do better and change. If human nature is that, and this goes right back to Yellowstone, those elk were very comfortable. There was no fear. There was nothing. They didn't need to change. When they brought in the wolves, all of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute, I've got to change. I've got to do something different. And that's what you want with your people. You want them to have that dissatisfaction with the status quo, so that they're looking for better ways to get it done. They're more efficient, and they want the company to succeed.
We are coming to the end of our time, and I ask everybody, if you were going to sum up ReWilding, well, I don't ask everybody about ReWilding, but if you could sum up the ReWilding work in 3 words or a brief sentence, how would you summarize ReWilding?
Profitable, consistent growth.
Perfect. Lee, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.